So, hi everyone, my name is Elise Kraatila and I am from Tampere. Finally managed to get here in Helsinki despite some problems with the train network. And my field is literary studies and more particularly narrative studies. So basically what I do is I research storytelling in its various forms. And what I have been doing so far, what I did my dissertation about, which I defended last year, is speculative fiction and especially fantasy fiction, and how storytelling uses speculation to respond to reality and interpret reality and represent reality in some way that generates new insight about the world we live in. And now at this postdoc phase, I've been wondering if this idea of speculative narratives, speculative storytelling could be expanded beyond fictional sphere, fictional narratives, and if we could maybe talk about speculative narratives in non-fictional texts and non-fictional narratives, and that's what I have made my presentation about today. So very quickly, to begin with, what do I mean when I talk about speculation and especially speculative narratives? Speculation as a term, of course, refers to some form of trying to gain knowledge about something that you cannot actually possibly know. Probably most often you might hear the term in the context of like finance, like stock market speculation or real estate speculation, for instance. So you are trying to guess, make educated guesses about the future that inform your decision in the present. When we're talking about speculative storytelling or speculative narratives, that takes on a little bit of another dimension. Because in literature, speculative literature, speculation is put into a form of a narrative that builds on like this kind of what-if question. What if things went like that? What if the future was like that? What if the world was like that? And you basically build a thought experiment in the form of a story. And in literary studies, speculation is usually applied to as like this kind of umbrella category to fantasy and science fiction and certain other genres that are lumped together under the umbrella of speculative fiction. But strictly speaking, all fiction is actually speculative because all fiction pretty much by definition deals with hypothetical scenarios, imaginary things, imaginary people, imaginary events, and tell stories about like something hypothetical, something imaginary. Or we could say on the other way around that all speculation is necessarily fictional because it is about presenting knowledge about something that we can only imagine, we can only theorize about. So in speculation, what we are doing when we speculate is that we build some form of provisional knowledge, some kind of knowledge that is contingent on a thought experiment or a theory or a hypothesis that we are building and a narrative that we are building along that hypothesis. So these speculative thought experiments built in literature or elsewhere are kind of like heuristic models for interpreting the world. And they are designed to generate some tentative answers to impossible questions that we cannot really answer with any certain kind of knowledge. So we build these speculative narratives to approach some kind of insight about those questions, even if we cannot really generate any like precise knowledge about them. So to put it in short, speculation in this literary theoretical sense is a form of narrativizing or generating knowledge about something unknown or unknowable. So sort of in order to make that unknown like discussable and thinkable and to let us talk about it and think about it. So far I have been focusing on speculation as a quality of fiction, quality of literature. And in fiction, we can say that speculation constitutes a certain kind of response to reality, a certain kind of representing reality or commenting on reality or interpreting reality. So if we think like realistic fiction, realistic narratives try to depict the world as it is, then speculative narratives try to add something to this reality, to depict this as it might be perhaps at some point in the future, or as it might look from some perspective that we cannot really take in real life, like what it feels like to be a bat or some other kind of animal, for example. And these literary thought experiments often take quite a grand scale, especially in science fictional and fantasy narratives. They are formulated around questions like, what if the future looked like this, or what if the world was like this? What might happen to the world so that we end up in a future that looks like this, and so on. So very big, like world historical questions, very big questions that often deal with the very nature of humanity and nature of the universe. And basically what these kinds of fictions do is they build worlds, like alternative worlds. Alternative realities that serve as these global scale models for reinterpreting reality. That's my major thesis of my dissertation. And these models are then offered up for the reader as heuristic tools they can use to question our habitual outlooks to this world, to imagine alternatives to current circumstances, and to rethink the world and human existence within it and see it in another perspective. And in this sense, these thought experiments very much resemble like classic philosophical thought experiments about the nature of reality, like the ship of Theseus, for example, or the trolley problem, if we're talking about ethical experiments. Things like that, and they are basically fleshed out and shaped into a story that is about events and human-like characters that live out this thought experiment, and that makes it offers the reader an opportunity to experience that thought experiment in a more like profound way than these very minimalistic philosophical thought experiments would necessarily allow. And a very simple example of this kind of speculative storytelling would be climate fiction, which is currently a very popular genre of science fiction. And here I have chosen as my example Emmi Itaranta's novel, Memory of Water, in Teemestarin kirja in Finnish, which presents to us this future world where climate change has run rampant, unmitigated, and we have ended up with this dystopic reality where there is a serious lack of water in the world. And this scenario, this world-based global-scale scenario is basically intended to interrogate our present thinking about the climate or present actions about the climate and provide some kind of knowledge or experiential opportunity to experience what it would be like to live in this world where the climate has warmed up for 5 degrees or so. So basically what this kind of speculation does is it builds alternative worlds, alternative scenarios to help us rethink our current circumstances. And that is a well-recognized quality of science fiction and speculative fiction in general. But I have started to wonder after completing my PhD researching these kinds of narratives is if these kind of speculative narratives could be found in non-fiction as well. And what first sparked my interest in this topic is this nature documentary by David Attenborough, Prehistoric Planet from Apple TV, which came out this year. And this is an interesting and funny case actually. When I first saw that David Attenborough has made something like this, I was like, wow, this is like made for me. This is the most awesome thing I've ever heard, because it's like David Attenborough nature documentary, right? And it's about dinosaurs. What could be greater than that? But then I started watching it, and I got this funny feeling, this kind of unsettling feeling, because these documentaries, you probably know the format, right? Is presented in a completely similar way to other David Attenborough's documentaries. So we are observing animals in their natural habitat when they have their mating rituals and have their young and raise their young and hunt each other and kill and get killed. And Attenborough says at the start of the documentary that we are using the latest imaging technology to provide you this view to the lives of these animals. But what he usually means when he says the latest imaging technology in his documentaries is that he has some super fast camera or a camera that can take pictures in absolute dark or something cool like that. But in this case, the latest imaging technology simply means CGI. So these dinosaurs are, obviously enough, they are fictional. So as a scholar of fiction, I got this like very unsettling, funny feeling when I watched this, because I couldn't make sense of if I was supposed to watch this as fiction or non-fiction, because the stories it tells are obviously fictional. They're obviously like speculations about the lives of these dinosaurs, but they are presented as observations, as completely factual narrative. So it really like messed with my head, actually, to be quite honest. And it started me to wonder that what is the like epistemic value of speculation in this kind of storytelling? Like, it is used to bring this kind of Cretaceous epoch to life, to show us that this is how it might actually have looked like. And it blurs these boundaries between fictional and non-fictional representation of the world. And it kind of like makes this completely fictional storytelling, frames it as a legitimate form of generating knowledge or communicating knowledge about these past epochs. And it felt weird to me, and then I showed a clip of this to my students, and they found it weird too. And then it gets more unsettling, because then I started to notice this kind of phenomenon in contemporary Finnish journalism. We have here an article from the national broadcasting company Yle, titled "More than 1 million Finns might have to flee from east to west if Russia threatened war. An evacuation journey in 2022 would be like this." And as you can see, there are no less than 3 conditionals in the title of the article alone. And the article is this kind of speculative scenario the journalist builds, where she tells a fictional story of a completely ordinary Finnish family from Joensuu who have to abandon their home and flee from Joensuu to Hankasalmi to some kind of refugee center, and to be relocated in other parts of Finland. And that fictional story, that's like speculative fictional, almost science fictional story in the sense that it's a future prediction, speculative future prediction, or a what-if scenario, is juxtaposed with expert statements from people from the Ministry of Interiors and other places who are actually making plans for these kinds of events in the force majeure circumstances where Russia invaded Finland. And then there is a third story told by the images used in the article, which are all of evacuations of Karelia during the World War II. So there are like these 3 levels of storytelling. There's the historical story, there is the speculative future, and there are the expert statements. And it's very interesting to me to ask what this kind of speculative storytelling, what is its purpose in journalism, and what is its like epistemic function? What kind of knowledge does it communicate Why is it deemed necessary to tell stories like this? Why is this kind of storytelling like part of the way we talk about like the plans of the Ministry of Interiors? Why do we need this fictional story to like flesh it out? And what makes this particularly interesting to me is that I think this is a part of a larger phenomenon in contemporary media. Like, I think we have seen a lot of these what-if narratives in media lately, these what-if scenarios. What if Russia invaded Finland? What if Putin used a nuclear bomb? What if the coronavirus mutated into something much worse than it currently is? What if we had to ration electricity next winter? Very popular one. And it makes me wonder why is it that in non-fictional storytelling in Finnish journalism, this speculative impulse, this impulse to tell these what-if stories, these speculative stories, is such a huge thing right now. And for full disclosure, I don't have answer to that yet. I only have speculations. But I discussed this article also with my students, and they were quite critical towards it. They found it ethically quite problematic, and basically saw in this an attempt to generate clicks, generate views, generate money from the advertisers by appealing to people's fears, to inviting people to read this because this is what they are like constantly thinking about. And the article justifies itself actually as this attempt to share information about how the Ministry of Interior has done all these preparations and perhaps reassure people that we have thought about these things and we are prepared. But I'm not sure that's the effect this article has for most readers. I don't know. But in conclusion, what is the epistemic value of this kind of speculation? Well, as I said, I don't have like ready-made answers for this yet. But what my earlier research would suggest is that the purpose of speculative storytelling, in a larger sense, is to be a manner to narrativize something that is unknown, to tell stories about something that is unknown and to make it some discussable and thinkable and maybe a little less like weird and terrifying, remote than it would otherwise be. And to make parts of reality that we cannot actually know somehow available for comprehension. And maybe these kind of speculative narratives in contemporary world can help us come to terms with the realization that we cannot know everything, we cannot be prepared for everything, that our knowledge of the world is tentative and incomplete and provisional, that what we really only have are theories. And maybe they can function as a sort of means for coping with uncertainty. I think that is one function of these kind of climate fictions I talked about earlier, like to help us think about climate change as not some like scary boogeyman that we cannot really like observe or understand, but as something that we can experience through fiction. But what these, especially this last case study, raises this important issue that there are some possible dangers and ethical risks also involved in this sort of speculative storytelling, this kind of speculative epistemics, speculative knowledge, because it has a risk of taking some provisional knowledge, some theories, some what-if propositions, and simply positing them as certain knowledge. Like, I think that's what pretty much happens in this Yle article in a way, when they tell the story of the imaginary family as if it is really happening at this moment, and like flesh it out that way and make it present it as a as like in this is what it would look like, this is what it would be like. And I think that this kind of speculative storytelling in nonfiction really serves as kind of justification or legitimation for using fictionalizing narrative techniques or using fictions and embedding it to this non-fictional context, and using that to appeal to people's emotions, because that is what fiction and narratives do really well, to appeal to people's beliefs, and in this last case maybe their insecurities. And yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm hoping to focus on this in my future research. Yeah, this is all I have to say about the topic at this point, so thank you all.